Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Rockies Daily. I'm your host, Scott Ayers, where we're talking all things Colorado Rockies. And look, folks, it's Friday. We made it to another weekend. But before you head into that weekend, here's some Rockies content for you. And first, let's talk about Zach Veen. Veen, who has had a lot of speculation around him. He's been that top prospect in the outfield, one of the Rockies' top prospects. He finally gets called up in 2025 to the major league level after having a great spring training. And he wasn't up. He wasn't up for long. He just had 34 at bats, batted 4 for 34, hit 118 with one home run, and had a 38% strikeout rate. More importantly, he could not keep up with the major league fastball, hitting under 100, .091 against four-seam fastballs. So for Zach Veen, the reason why we talk about him is you would think going into 2026, hey, you know what? The team is bad. We'll give anyone an opportunity. But in that outfield, it's a little bit more crowded. And there is no guarantee that he will earn a spot at the major league level. And so for Veen, this feels like a pretty, a pretty big year in the regard to he has to somehow carve out a role for himself in 2026. Because you look at it, you've got Jordan Beck, you've got Britton Doyle, Mickey Moniak, you now have McCarthy that the Rockies just traded for, you have Freeman in that outfield. That's five guys right there that Zach Veen is going to have to compete with and find a way to be better than. He has to be better than at least three of them, right, if he wants to become a starter. And it's a very interesting time for him because he's now 24 years old. He's still young in the grand scheme of things. However, it's getting to that point in terms of development and everything where you really want to see something from Zach Veen. And we'll talk about it. Excuse me, I'm still getting a little over my cold here. We'll talk about it a little bit later on in the show, but having prospects actually turn into something is really important for Colorado. It's really important for how they develop as a franchise here in the next 4 or 5 years, because not only does that mean, hey, we're probably going to have better product on the field, but it also gives you a better opportunity to make trades with other teams, right? If Zach Veen can develop into something, it just unlocks more avenues for Colorado. Whereas if he struggles and he continues to have the same issues that he had in 2025, and now some of that could have been attributed to his ankle injury that we found out he had, but still, if he has more of these issues, it limits what Colorado can do, right? Because now it's like, well, hey, teams probably aren't going to want to trade for him. We can't play him. It just becomes more restrictive for Colorado. And obviously it's not rocket science, but it just unlocks what you're able to do as a team when these prospects can be good, right? And we saw it with that Freddie Peralta trade, which, you know what, we talked about Peralta last show. I recorded before the trade was announced, go all day. All of a sudden, we see the news, Peralta traded to the Mets. What can you do? Hey, that theory can still hold. If he doesn't sign to a long-term deal with the Mets, theory can still hold. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But still, those are the kind of things, though, is, having prospects that you can then trade, use as poker chips. For Colorado, they'd probably obviously care more on the side of actually developing, building from within to obviously have a successful roster. But you just in general need to have decent prospects. And Zach Veen has been highly rated. So the expectation is that translates and he can become a pretty good player. Because his team isn't good enough where, it's a crowded outfield, so sorry, man. Like, he can be a starter at the major league level, but he has to figure out his whiff rate. He has to find a way to get on base more, and that will be a big challenge. And I think it's important for fans to obviously not take in the fool's gold that can be spring training. Now, if he has another strong spring, that is encouraging, but that does not by any means translate to, hey, he's going to be successful come season start. But that's at least the first step, and that's really what we're going to need to see, is that he kind of got kind of the bad juju out of his head, and his back come back to form. So that's going to be one of the big things for Veen, and just trying to claw his way at a major league level. And then we talk about guys at a major league level. There's guys who still don't have a home, and two former Rockies, German Marquez and Austin Gomber, both of which obviously struggled a ton last year. Gomber did sign with the Cubs minor league team at the end of 2025, probably just as a backup arm when they went into their postseason run, but both are now looking for a home. Marquez, 6.7 ERA last year. Gomber, 7.5 ERA last year. Just kind of shows you what the Rockies were working with last year. There's not much juice to a story like this other than noting, hey, these guys, they might find a home come spring training, like a non-guarantee. Let them pitch through spring training, and maybe they can find their way onto a team. That's the hope. You obviously hope for both of them. Marquez, obviously, just being that, kind of feels like that lifelong Rocky that if he was anywhere else, his stats would probably look a lot better. But because he pitched at Coors Field, all of his numbers are just completely inflated. And then for Austin Gomber, you just feel for, he didn't choose the Nolan Arenado trade. He didn't decide, hey, I'm gonna just anger an entire fan base. He came in with a really high expectations, just because of what that trade was, and he obviously didn't live up to any of them. Really, the most thing you can say is that he just chewed through innings when the Rockies were dealing with injuries, but it's not really the compliment you want when you trade one of the best players in franchise history for a pitcher that had a career ERA of over 5. So it just not the tenure that the Rockies wanted from Gomber. Now both him and Marquez are free agents. We'll see. I really think that they'll probably sign some type of non-guarantee and let them compete in spring training, and then from there, who knows? But that's where some former Rockies are at. It is always interesting, though, especially when the younger Rockies pitchers leave Colorado. They typically have a more successful career. Tyler Anderson is a great example of that. Yoeli Shashin is a good example of that. So very few pitchers leave and are actually worse when they leave. Ubaldo Jimenez is like the golden example of that, though. So regardless, we'll see kind of where those two guys end up, if they end up anywhere. They're at that age that teams might not even take a chance on them. So both over 30. We'll kind of see what happens there. The Rockies are still looking for another rotation piece, and there is a carousel of pitchers still out there, and that's why we talked about how Gomber and Marquez might still have a chance to find a home. There's still a world where the Rockies are signing another starting pitcher. We're obviously less than a month away from pitchers and catchers reporting, but still, it is, I think, a need to just get one more arm for that starting rotation. Chris Bassett is still available. He is someone that I think might try to go to a contender to shore up a rotation, but would be an interesting get for the Rockies. He had a lot of success last year. He can generate ground balls, which is huge, and has a really big pitching repertoire. So it could be someone to look at. Again, I think someone like Bassett, who had an under 4 ERA last year, had a lot of success. He's probably looking at contenders, and that's going to be, we talk about it, the biggest struggle for Colorado is just attracting pitching in general is difficult. Attracting free agent pitchers that are successful is going to be an even bigger challenge. Now, Michael Lorenzen has been successful, and he's had some good seasons, but it's not like he's coming off a really big year. Whereas Bassett is coming off a really solid year where he just was on a team that made the World Series. And so how do you draw on a pitcher that just went from, an inning away from winning the World Series to a team that was essentially eliminated in May? So those are the conversations that the Rockies front office is having, is how do we convince guys? And you need psychos like Michael Lorenzen who want to take on the challenge of coming to Coors Field and pitching at Coors Field. But regardless, Chris Bassett is available. He's probably one of the best guys still available that the Rockies could get. If you look at the list of pitchers available, there's a lot of them. Not many of them are very good, though. But a lot of veterans, so the Rockies could look to just getting a veteran arm. So we'll see. We'll see on the starting pitching front. And then, of course, the Freddie Peralta trade going to the New York Mets. The Mets had a bad starting rotation in 2025. This kind of shores that up. And again, we didn't see any form of an extension or anything like that. So we talked about it last show. We mentioned Peralta as an example of, hey, if he goes, if he doesn't get traded or if he doesn't get re-signed, he's a guy you could look at. And I think the Rockies will still have that strategy for guys in that after the 26 or after the 27 season. This is a year of figuring it out. But one of the things to draw from this trade, right, is just how important it is to have those prospects. We mentioned that kind of the beginning of the show because that's what the Mets dealt. They dealt the number 30 overall prospect, Jet Williams, and the number 5 prospect in their system, Brandon Sproat. And again, these are two guys that have a chance to play in 2026, but it just shows, hey, that's a pretty big difference. Excuse me, is having prospects that you're able to trade. A lot of what San Diego did is they traded prospects galore to have the team that they have today. Now, a lot of those prospects are now very good MLB players, and you could say, hey, maybe it wasn't smart to trade some of those prospects, but when you go all in, you're going to make those kind of trades to try to win a World Series. But the biggest thing is actually having that. And I think that's going to be one of the big goals for the Colorado Rockies is how do you reinvigorate this farm system? And we've talked about it a little on the show. The Rockies farm system, relatively speaking, is not good or not good enough. And you can say, well, they called up a couple guys, the ranking, blah, 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 blah. You look at the top 50, Ethan Holiday is the only name of note for the Rockies. They do not have many top-end prospects. Charlie Condon is probably the most top-end prospect that's MLB ready. And that's not to say that guys who aren't listed as top prospects can't contribute. That's not true. But it makes a huge difference even in trade negotiations. You could have a top prospect that maybe doesn't even play in the MLB, but it's another poker chip to add to say, hey, we've got prospect that's ranked number 25. We'll give you that and something else in a certain trade, right? That makes a huge difference is being able to come to the table and have things that you are able to offer. And on top of that, getting prospects in return is obviously huge for developing, depending on which route that you want to go. But for Colorado, they're just in this very interesting circumstance where there's not a lot of talent on the field, right? They have a couple of guys that have developed into nice pieces, but nothing crazy. So you don't have a ton of talent in the field, and you don't have a ton of talent in the farm. And so when your farm system is ranked in the 20s and your roster is ranked dead last, that's a big problem. That is a big problem to have. And So you mentioned bad roster, bad farm, and you don't have the money to spend to rebuild, right? Like you're probably not going to see the Monfort spend New York Mets or Toronto Blue Jays or LA Dodgers type of money. Part of it is because they just don't have the same type of money, but you're just not going to see that kind of spending. And so, I know this segment is about the trade that the Mets made, but in reality, it's about the Rockies, and you compare them to other teams in the league, and it's hard not to feel a little concerned of how long a rebuild might take, just because there's not a lot of chips right now that the Rockies have to play with, and that's a problem, and that's something that we'll continue to discuss as we go into the season, as the season concludes. So the development in the farm system is really crucial for Colorado, because they're not gonna beat teams in free agency, not very often. If you're not beating teams in free agency, you better develop well, and the Rockies haven't done that very well for the last handful of years. So interesting times. You need guys to be better. You need guys like Zach Veen. We'll end the show where we started. You need guys like Zach Veen to step up, to become the players that you expect them to be, and continue to develop from there. But until then, we're getting closer and closer to spring training. Nice little negative note to end on, but in reality, the Rockies can turn it around. It's just a matter of when. And hopefully we're alive to see it happen. But until next week, I'm Scott Ayers. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to share with friends and family. Hit that subscribe button. If you like the video, toss the video a like as well. So appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.